Tonight we're going to begin our series on kind of giving an overview of the minor prophets. I think the minor prophets sometimes kind of gets overlooked by a lot of different people. And as I said, it's been a while since I've read through the minor prophets, so this is going to be kind of a study for me as much as it is anybody else. But I think it's going to be a good study because I think it's going to be something that will touch on a lot of different subjects and kind of fill us in on a part of history that, at least Old Testament history, that maybe we sometimes don't really get a handle on. And so we're going to be looking at kind of an overview of prophecy and the writing prophets and the minor prophets, and really kind of getting a grasp of what Old Testament history was back in that time period. But at the same time, we're going to go on to take a look at Hosea next week. And if you want to make this a good study, a more productive study, then read through the book that we are going to be talking about. And so for next week, we're going to be looking at Hosea, and so, read through the Hosea. We're going to spend two Bible study nights on Hosea. And so, if you get all the way through Hosea this week, that's great. If you don't, if you just get halfway through, that's okay. By the way, how many of you have ever read Hosea? Okay. Read it, and you will probably be surprised. That's all I'm going to say. You're going to probably go, what? And that'll give us something to talk about next week. Okay? All right. So starting out with, let's just talk about, what the books of the minor prophets are, and really what prophecy is in general. Up here, by the way, this is something that comes from, let's see, Gospel Light Publications. It is called the Bible Study Resource Guide, I think. I don't know. If you notice the copyright date, it was 1989, I believe. Anyway, it was something that I picked up a way long time ago when I was in seminary, and I thought, hey, that would be a good resource to use down throughout the years because it says a resource book. And believe it or not, it really has been. And, and so I thought, well, this might be, some good little graphics to, scan and copy in for tonight's lesson. And, but anyway, what is prophecy? What about Israel's prophets? Well, Israel has had prophets, at least in the Old Testament, had prophets all the way through its history. You could say that Moses was a prophet. You could say that, for example, David, he's considered to be a prophet, even though, Jesus called him that, even though, at the time you wouldn't consider David to be a prophet like Isaiah or somebody like that. Back in David's day, sometimes prophets were called seers. And so, they had a little bit of a different name. But I think that a lot of times when we think of a prophet or we think of prophecy, we might get off on a little bit of the wrong track. When we think of prophecy, what do we oftentimes think of?
Telling the future.
Telling the future, and we sometimes think that's all that the books of the prophets are about. When really it's not that at all. As a matter of fact, if you look at this little paragraph here, it says the word prophet means to speak out or to foretell God's word. And that's really what prophecy was. It was a forthtelling, not a foretelling, but a forthtelling. In other words, God would have some sort of message that he wanted to give his people, the nation of Israel, or he wanted to give other nations surrounding Israel. And so he would give it to a man who would then go and tell those things. And so that's why it is a forthtelling, or it is to just simply to speak out. And that's exactly what prophet was, and that's exactly what prophecy means. Now, in the Old Testament, what we saw is that oftentimes they spoke out about all kinds of different sins that were going on in Israel. injustice, hypocrisy, immorality, especially idolatry. That was a big one because Israel had a big problem with idolatry. Now, we need to understand that a lot of the books of prophets, when you read them, I mean, it is a lot of doom and gloom, okay? And so when you look at it, you think, oh, wow, they're really coming down heavy. But understand that you've got to think that Israel was in this covenant relationship with God, like we talked about, a couple weeks ago. And so in that covenant relationship with God, where they promised they were going to be God's holy people and do what he wanted, you can look at the books of the prophets with a lot of mercy and a lot of grace that God is giving his people, because it's not just simply, okay, here's the law, well, you broke the law, then that's it. I mean, it was, here's the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, and now we are giving you warning, 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 warning. It's kind of like, a lot of times with, parents and 2-year-olds or 1-year-olds, it's like, don't do that, no, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and finally it just kind of has to come to a head about things. And so that is what a lot of the prophets were. And so, we look at it and we think, okay, well, here's all these warnings. This is a lot of doom and gloom. But at the same time, this is a lot of God being patient and God being merciful and God trying to direct his people and really trying to direct his people in warning them that some very bad things were going to be coming around if they didn't change. And keep in mind, these were people who had promised that they were going to be God's people, and they were under that covenant relationship with God. And so here is this idea that the prophets speaking out about the Israelites' disobedience and how they were going to be punished because of it. But at the same time, there is also the idea that prophets were going to have, or God was going to have a lot of mercy as well. And so as we look at the writings of the prophets, and we're not just talking about the minor prophets, but also other prophets, well, what we see is that, there's a lot of God is going to forgive you. God is going to be merciful to you. There's a lot of urging to turn to the Lord. There's a lot of urging to repent over sins. And so, the job of the prophet was to point out sins and point out judgment, but also to say, hey, there is forgiveness here and there is mercy there as well. Now, there's one final thing that we have with the prophets, and that is that there was going to be, as what it says here, is going to be foretelling of a time when God would save a remnant of his people. And so here is a time of hope as well. And so after God has come and judged his people, there's also promises there that God was going to restore them back to what he wanted them to be, and even go further. And that is that there was going to be a time of blessing that is like none other. Okay? And so when you sum it all up, we do have a chastising over sin. We've got a warning over disobedience. We've got an urging for repentance, but we also have a promise of hope as well. Okay? And so those 4 different things are right there with the writing prophets. That's what prophecy is. Now, that promise right there, that is where a lot of it is going to be the foretelling of the future, because this is God saying, I'm going to do this for you. This is going to be a time of this judgment, but this is going to be a time of blessing. This is going to be a time of restoration. Now, some of those promises have already been fulfilled, and so they're going to be in our past, but some of those promises are still yet in our future, because some of these promises involve the coming of the Messiah, and not just simply the coming of the Messiah the first time, but especially coming of the Messiah the second time to rule and reign, because that's when all of these things of righteousness are going to come into play. Okay? So, does prophecy have to do with foretelling the future? Yeah, but not as much as what you might think. It really is kind of a small little thing. And in that foretelling of the future, we need to understand that some of it has already been fulfilled. Okay? You got questions on that so far? Okay. Well, here we've got books. We've got books of the major prophets, and we got books of the minor prophets. And so, the major prophets, a lot of people know the major prophets, right? I mean, you've heard of Isaiah, you've heard of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, you heard of Daniel, right? And so those are the major prophets. The minor prophets, we hear about, but, sometimes it kind of gets lost in the shuffle and everything, right? Now, these books are not called major prophets and minor prophets because of the subject material. We need to understand that the minor prophets are just as important and just as authoritative as the major prophets. It's not like, okay, the major prophets, those are the big things. That's the stuff that God really wanted to. No, it both is. It's just that the major prophets are called the major prophets because there's a lot of words in it. There's a lot of words in it. As a matter of fact, do you know what the biggest book in the Old Testament is? The biggest book in the Bible is in terms of word count?
Isaiah.
No.
I was thinking it was Psalms.
No. It is Jeremiah. Okay, so yeah, you were at least on the right track. But it's Jeremiah.
Will Isaiah have 66 chapters?
It does have 66 chapters, but that's why I said in terms of word count. When you stack up the words of Jeremiah with all the other ones, Psalm including, Jeremiah takes the cake. And when you start to read through Jeremiah, you're going to see, hey, this is a pretty big book. It really goes and goes and goes. And so you can see that major in terms of word count, but it's minor in terms of word count, but it's not major minor in terms of what's in there too. Okay? Now, when you look at the books in the minor prophets, it's you just gotta kind of memorize them, right? And that is you just Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay, and so maybe as we're going through this, you can kind of think, okay, now I'm going to memorize these minor prophets because they sometimes they do kind of get hard to memorize. One thing that I kind of think about memorizing them is to kind of think about them in terms of where they are in subject material. What we're going to see is the Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. All of those are what's called the post-exilic books because they happen post-exile, which we're going to talk about. The other ones, sometimes they're going to refer to the nation of Israel, sometimes they're going to refer to the nation of Judah, sometimes they're going to refer to both. Okay? All right, so you say, what do you mean nation of Israel, nation of Judah, and both? Okay, well, we've got this little graphic here, and, got it stretched out across there, but this is kind of giving you a little bit of a timeline on Israel's history. Okay, now, give you a little bit of overview as far as Israel's history goes. We have got different time periods. We've got the time of the United Kingdom, and then we've got the time period of the divided kingdom. Then we've got the time period of the exile. And then we've got the time period of the return or post-exile. Okay, so you say, okay, what do you mean United Kingdom, divided kingdom, exile, and then return? Well, simply put, United Kingdom is when all of the nation, the 12 tribes of Israel, were reunited under one king. Those kings were Saul, David, and Solomon. Okay? Now, after Solomon, we have the divided kingdom. And the divided kingdom was split between the tribe of Judah, and then you've got all the other tribes. Tribe of Benjamin and maybe Simeon kind of followed along with Judah later on. But Israel is going to be the northern kingdom, and then Judah is going to be the southern kingdom. And so when you read through the Bible, when you hear Israel, at least after this time period of the divided kingdoms, more than likely it's going to be referring to that northern kingdom. This is all the 12 or all the tribes, Okay. Sometimes you're going to hear about Judah. That's going to be the tribe of Judah, and then Benjamin, and maybe some other little people that came from the northern kingdom and settled into Judah. Sometimes the northern kingdom is going to be called Samaria. And the reason why it's called Samaria is because the city of Samaria was predominantly its capital. Sometimes Judah is going to be called Jerusalem because Jerusalem is its capital. Now, how did all that division take place? Well, simply put, you got 12 tribes that were based on 12 brothers, and so there was always a little bit of rivalry there. And so that rivalry just kind of bled over into the tribes. And so during the time period of the judges, there was a little bit of friction back and forth between the two of them. And so you got Saul, and then after Saul was killed, we had a little bit of a civil war that happened, but then everything came back under David's control. Then David passed along that kingdom to Solomon. And boy, it was a good kingdom, wasn't it? I mean, it was growing, it was expansive, it was very rich, very wealthy. People were building left and right. I mean, during Solomon's reign, the palace was built, the temple was built. There was all kinds of different fortified cities that were built. So Solomon had all kinds of different building activities. But in those building activities, who did the labor? The people did. Okay? And they really didn't have a whole lot of choice in the matter as well. And so Solomon, in addition to building a lot of things, he also had a lot of wives. And those wives worshiped foreign gods. They led his heart astray. And so at the end of his life, he started to worship all of these foreign gods. And because of that, God sent a prophet to come and say, the kingdom is going to be taken away. The reason why it wasn't completely taken away from Solomon was because of promises that were made to David. God promised David that he was always going to have a son that was going to sit on the throne. And so because of that, God allowed one tribe to stay with Solomon, and then all the other tribes were going to go to a different king. Now, this wasn't going to happen in Solomon's day. Instead, it was going to happen during this time of his son, Rehoboam. Okay, so after Solomon died, then, and by the way, the prophet then went and anointed a man named Jeroboam, who was a man who was in charge of all the conscriptive labor. And Solomon tried to have him killed, and he ran down to Egypt. Okay, all right, so that's that. Okay, so after Solomon died, Rehoboam got together with all of his little buddies, and his buddies said, he was kind of like, okay, what am I going to do? We've got it good because we're living here high life in the palace. The older advisors came up and said, you know what? Your father treated the people harshly. If you will, just give them a little bit of a break, they will love you and serve you forever. Well, the younger generation, his buddies came up and said, nah, come on, you can't let them up. If you let up on them, they're going to revolt against you. And so you need to tell them that if you thought my father's, had a heavy thumb on you, you need to understand that my little pinky is the size of his waist. And he was going to really lay it on them. And so he told them exactly those words. And the people said, you know what? We really don't even have to follow you anyway. Let's go get Jeroboam to be our king. And so there was the split. Okay? So this northern kingdom that is right up here, you notice that it says, note, some minor kings are omitted from this chart. There's a whole bunch of kings that are omitted from the chart on the northern kingdom because there's a lot of intrigue with those kings. I think they had either 22 or 32 different kings. 8 of them died either by murder or suicide. One, his reign lasted 7 days. And so, you can kind of see that maybe for the sake of brevity, we're just going to put the bigger guys in there. But it all starts with this guy right here, Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam was that man that was actually anointed to be king by a prophet. But at the same time, he was not anointed to go and do whatever he wanted to do. He still needed to follow the Lord, to which he did not do. He was in a position of understanding that Jerusalem was down there and his kingdom was up here. I wish I had it on a map to show you. But in Jerusalem was the temple. And so everybody, all the Israelites were required to go to the temple and make a pilgrimage there for worship. And he was thinking, you know what, that's not too good for my reign. And so what he decided to do was he was going to make some golden calves. Boy, that kind of sounds a whole lot like Exodus, doesn't it? Make some golden calves, put one at Bethel, which was at the southern end of the northern kingdom, and put another one at Dan, which is the northern end of the kingdom. And then he told everybody, you guys don't have to go to Jerusalem. You can worship right here. See, I've got this brand new worship here for you. It's a great place. You don't have to make all that. You even get your choice of 2 different ones. And so not only is it beautiful, it's convenient as well. And for the priest, the Levitical priesthood, they didn't have anything of it. And so he decided, well, I'm just going to go take my own priest and put my own priest in there as well. So you can see that right off the bat, the northern kingdom of Israel really were not following the Lord. What they were doing is taking bits and pieces of the law, but mixing it in with everything else. Now, Jeroboam, his son Baasha, Baasha and other people too, followed after that same pattern of idolatry. And then all of a sudden, here we come to Omri and we come to Ahab. Anybody ever hear of Ahab? Anybody hear of Ahab's wife? Ahab's wife is Jezebel. Now everybody, oh yeah, I remember hearing about Jezebel. One thing that Jezebel did was that she was not an Israelite. And so she came from Phoenicia and took her foreign gods with her, Baal and Ashtoreth. And not only did she have Baal and Ashtoreth, but she had priests and priestesses of Baal and Ashtoreth as well. And not only that, but she said, you guys have to do that. You've got to worship Baal and you've got to worship Ashtoreth. And if you will worship the Lord, we're going to persecute you. And so here we've got this man, Elisha. Okay? Elijah was not a writing prophet. In other words, he didn't write down his message. But he was a prophet in terms of he went and he spoke about those 4 different things that we talk about. He pointed out sin. He pointed out the fact that God was going to judge them. He pointed out and urged them to repent of their sins. He didn't do much foretelling about what the future was going to hold, but he did urge the Israelites to repent. Ahab and then his family, there were some other people after Ahab, they really plunged Israel into idolatry. And then along comes Jehu. And Jehu was a little bit of a reckless guy. And a prophet came and anointed Jehu and then took off running because I think he understood Jehu is going to clean house. And that's exactly what he did. He was a military commander and he just said, okay, guys, let's go. And so he took off and, murdered and killed everybody that was there and then took over. But the idolatry never left. So in the northern kingdom of Israel, not one king was considered to be a good king. They were all considered to be evil kings. They fluctuated in their idolatry. Sometimes they would come closer to the Lord, sometimes they drift further away, but they were never considered to be a good king. Now, what is a good king? A good king is going to be somebody who at least recognizes the authority of the Lord, recognizes the authority of the law, and at least attempts to follow after that and seek the Lord's guidance and worship and follow the Lord. Israel, like I said, never had one. And so as what we were talking about when we talked about in our study in Jonah, in 722 BC, what happens is the God used the Assyrians to come in and judge the northern kingdom of Israel. 32,000 people were deported. Many others were killed. Only the poorest and the weakest were left in the land. But also what happened was the Assyrians took conquered peoples from other places in the empire and then brought them in. And so you've got people coming in, you've got the remnants of idolatrous Israel that are living in the land that have this amalgamation of, worshiping the golden calves and idolatry and everything like that. At the same time, the prophets that are speaking to them and understanding the judgment that had fallen upon them, they start to intermarry with all the other people that were coming in with all of their religious ideas as well. And many, many years later, at the time of Jesus, guess what we've got? We've got Samaritans. Okay, and you say, okay, well, who are the Samaritans? Well, this is the Samaritans right here. They are half Israelite, they're half other people. They have their own way of doing things. They have their own religion. They have everything. Some of it's very similar to Judaism in Jesus' day. Much of it is not. And so you can kind of see why the Israelites and the Samaritans just really didn't like each other because of that. Okay, so we've got that. Now we've got the southern kingdom, or Judah. So you remember I said that God promised David he was always going to have a ruler that sat on the throne. And so unlike here where we've got different rulers coming in and cleaning house and taking over and then setting up a dynasty, and then somebody else coming in, cleaning house, setting up a dynasty, and so on and so forth, we don't have that with the southern kingdom. We don't have that with Judah. Instead, we have Father passing the kingdom on to the Son. Father passing on to the Son. Father passing on to the Son. There was a little bit of a kick up along the time of, let me see, I think it was Josiah right here. But as far as the continuity of things, we had all of that taking place. Oh, excuse me, it was along the time of Joash. So we've got all of this in there. Now, when you talk about the southern kingdom, there were people that it's described to be a good king, and then you have people that were described to be an evil king. And again, what constituted good and what constituted evil? Somebody who at least recognized God and the authority of God, authority of God's law, and they try to at least administer their kingdom in accordance to that, and they at least worship the Lord and worship the Lord in Jerusalem and try to do that. They weren't perfect at it. Sometimes, they had and allowed idolatry to take place as well. But you had good kings, and the evil kings would be kings that did not recognize God, did not worship God in all of those things. At the same time, you've got these prophets that are saying, hey, look, judgment just happened to the northern kingdom. Judgment's going to happen to you as well. And so what happens is in the time of the exile, this happened. So the Babylonians came in 3 different times, 609 BC, 597 BC, 586 BC, and attacked Jerusalem, captured it, and then took captives away. The last time in 586 BC, they destroyed the temple, they took a lot of people away, and in each case, they took them to Babylon. So the Assyrians took the Israelites and scattered them all over their kingdom and then took those people in. What the Babylonians did is that they just simply took people out and brought them to Babylon. If you remember, Daniel was one of the very first people that was taken out of Israel, brought to Babylon, because they wanted him to be part of their structure and government. Only the best and the brightest for that. Ezekiel is going to be a prophet that was taken to Babylon, but he was in the second wave, and so he wasn't some of the best and the brightest, but they were allowed to have life and farm and have a settlement on the Shabbat River. And then the third deportation was the largest. Now, Jeremiah prophesied that captivity was going to last 70 years. And so finally, towards the end of that 70-year period, we see that the Persians and the Medes come and defeat the Babylonians, and then the Persians allow a group to come back under this man Zerubbabel. Actually, first of all, it was Sheshbazzar starting out with, and either that is Zerubbabel or he died and Zerubbabel took over. But what we see is that Zerubbabel led a group of people back, and that was the first time that they came back, and they tried to rebuild the temple and try to restore worship of the Lord in Jerusalem. And then much later on from that, we see that Ezra comes in and leads another group of people. Now, Ezra was a priest, and Ezra was one that was very concerned about the law and very concerned that the people back in Jerusalem were falling back into their old idolatrous ways. And so he was allowed to come with a lot of different people to come in and try to make reformations of the day. And then last but not least, we have Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was somebody who was a cupbearer to the king. And, the king looked at him and said, "Hey, why are you so sad looking?" And that was a very bad thing to be, because you didn't want to be sad looking in the presence of the king. The king may say, "I don't like your look. I think I'm just going to remove your head from your body so I don't have to look at it anymore." But Nehemiah just boldly said, I'm upset because of my people. And so the king allowed Nehemiah to come and make another trip back with other people. That was in 444 BC, and to try to rebuild the wall that's there. Okay? Now, the reason why I want to talk about all that history there is because as we're looking at different minor prophets, these minor prophets are going to be writing all the way from this time right here. Well, let me see. Jeroboam II. Actually, it could have been before that. But from there, all the way to here. And so you've got some minor prophets that are going to be talking to the northern kingdom. You've got some minor prophets whose message is going to be to the southern kingdom. You got some minor prophets whose message is both. You've got some minor prophets, in fact, those 5 that I mentioned that are post-exilic, they're going to be in this time period right here saying, hey, you know what? This is what we need to be doing because of what has happened in the past. And so in order to get an understanding about what these people's message was, you've got to have an understanding about what was going on during the day and time. And I'm not expecting you to say, oh, I understand Old Testament history, but just kind of understand some of the basics. And that is, you've got a divided kingdom. Why was it divided? Well, it was divided because of Solomon's sins and Rehoboam's foolishness, basically. Okay? All right, you've got the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom was very much a part of what God wanted. Why was it? Because that's the way that God, intended it, or is that what the people did? Well, it's what the people did, right? Okay. You've got the southern kingdom. Well, how's the southern kingdom different from the northern kingdom? Well, they're different in terms of who was leading them, but they weren't different in terms of the sins, because they had their own problems and struggles with idolatry and not worshiping the Lord too. Okay? Then you've got the time of the exile. Then you've got the time of the return. And then when we get to the time of return, we've got a whole new set of people. We got a whole new set of problems of, what is God doing with us? Now that we are after this judgment that He has given us, life is still pretty bad. Life is still pretty hard. What else is there? Well, there is a future hope that's coming, and that is Jesus Christ, and later when Jesus Christ returns. But at the same time, the focus is, hey, this is what people got to be doing, and at the same time, you don't need to fall back into the old ways. Okay? All right, I've just been sitting here rambling and talking and everything. You guys got any questions?